it wasn't that we were working in a bad way, I think. And I think that's quite important to come across, because sometimes you go into a place and you're like, this, we need a drastic change here. It wasn't that, there wasn't that. We didn't need to do it. But I could see from having worked in it before that there was loads of value that we could get from it. And I think the first thing which made me want to suggest it was I'd been working there a few months, and it was over the Christmas break that when we came back, one of our engineers said, "Oh, I did loads of work over Christmas because nobody was bothering me."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." So like we have this really skilled bunch of engineers who are capable of shipping really fast and shipping really well and writing lots of really good code. So there's a blocker here. Something is blocking them from being able to do that faster. Like, can we just do this all the time? Can we get that kind of Christmas break feeling all the time?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I kind of thought, okay, I'd mentioned Shape Up to the team really kind of ad hoc. I just kind of said, oh, we should look towards this. And then I thought, okay, it's time. I need to actually put some time in, read back through the book, really understand it. And I want to present it to the team as this is going to be a fundamental shift in the way of working, but it's going to be really valuable for us.
Welcome to Shapers and Builders, the show about better ways to deliver great software products. Today I'm speaking with Chris Boakes, Senior Software Engineer at Zoopla. Zoopla is a real estate company based in London, UK, which is best known for its property search website, zoopla.co.uk. This conversation is part of a series about companies that use ShapeUp, a delivery framework originally created at Basecamp. If you've never heard of ShapeUp, check the show notes for a link to the video Shaping in a Nutshell by Ryan Singer, former head of strategy at Basecamp and author of the book ShapeUp, Stop Running in Circles and Ship Work That Matters. In our conversation, we dive deep into how Chris pitched ShapeUp to his team and got both his peers and engineering leadership to agree to trial a new way of working in an organization that's largely running on Scrum. Chris had previously worked with ShapeUp at a startup, and when he joined Zoopla, an organization with hundreds of engineers, he immediately started spotting opportunities to improve the way his team worked. If you're an individual contributor who's thinking of adopting ShapeUp in your team, this episode is for you. Enjoy. So Chris, I'm actually super excited for our conversation. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So happy to have you on today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, David.
I want to ease a bit into our conversation on ShapeUp, and maybe just can you give us a quick rundown of your background, your professional background, and your current role at Zoopla?
Sure thing. So I've been an engineer since the days of Internet Explorer 6, where I was creating GIF fallbacks for because it didn't support PNGs. So I've been doing this a little while, and I work for Zoopla now, and they were founded in 2007, so they've been around quite a long time. And they're most commonly known in the UK as a property website where you can find places to rent and buy. But they also have a bunch of other offerings, and one of which is Alto, which is a sales and letting CRM for estate agents. And that's the side of the business that I work on. So it's business to business. That's been in development for 13 years. So again, quite an old product, quite mature. And product and tech at Zoopla as a whole is 278. So there's a split there between the consumer side, so the website, and customer tools and software, as well as central functions like data science. And on the side that I work on, which is Alto, we're split into different domains. So it's a huge product, and being split into kind of different areas of it has kind of helped us develop a deeper understanding of those sections. Cool. And we're split into nine small teams. So I work on a team of 10, which is 6 engineers, 1 QE, 1 head of product, 1 product manager, and 1 designer. And I've been working here just under a year.
Cool. You've basically kind of answered all my follow-up questions that I would have had.
Oh,
good job.
Right.
One thing I like to also ask about is the funding model. Are you all bootstrapped or self-funded or VC-backed in any way?
Yeah, so we're owned by a private equity firm, a US private equity firm called Silver Lake Partners, and they bought us in May 2018.
Okay. So 2018. It still feels recent, but it's 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Is that anything you notice in your day to day in terms of how goals get communicated down the line or passed on? Any growth pressures that you're feeling in any
No,
way?
I haven't really. We haven't really felt any of that. They're not too hands on. There hasn't really been any kind of interruption to making a great product and having really good iterations on that product. There hasn't been any kind of they haven't really got involved to that extent, to that
Yeah.
degree at all, which is good.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. I'm really into. I mean, there's a current interest of mine. I'm really into understanding how TV series get produced, and they always have this notes getting passed from the network to the production teams, and that's what I think of sometimes. You have these companies that own companies that pass notes sometimes. Cool. Um, awesome. I just want to make sure that I really have a crystal clear understanding of the setup. You mentioned there's kind of a 9 teams split across 9 domains. Is that just on the B2B side, on the Alto side that you mentioned, or is that across all of it?
That's just on the B2B side. So there's
Oh,
the
wow.
consumer side, which has their own setup. So because product and tech is 278, that's it's quite a
Yeah.
big team. It's certainly one of the biggest teams that I've worked on in my career. So yeah, they really have to be split down to be able to understand their own areas of the product and to create to be able to iterate on it and to understand all of the problems. It's such a huge ecosystem to understand as a whole that it really makes sense to have people split up like that. I think teams split
Yeah.
up like that.
Yeah. That is a really a huge organization for sure. I understand that you have a bit of a longer background personally with ShapeUp, and you've been we talked about this previously. You've been kind of the spark for ShapeUp now at Zoopla. Can you tell me a bit about your early experience? When did you first encounter ShapeUp? What were your thoughts around it?
Sure. So I first came across ShapeUp when I was working at the company before Zoopla, actually, called Onv. They were a startup, and I guess you commonly see ShapeUp being used in startups for
Yeah.
a lot of great reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into in this podcast. But it was I'd love to say that it was a kind of big bang. This is incredible moment for me, but it really wasn't actually. I was just, I kind of floated into it. It was what they were doing there by default. So they already, I didn't join the startup right at the beginning. They already had this in place. And I was kind of like, oh, this is interesting. I'm used to working in Scrum for my entire career, and this isn't the default here. So I was quite curious about it. But one thing I picked up on was we didn't have as many meetings when I don't love going to meetings. So I
Yeah.
was like, that's pretty cool. And also, I noticed that we were shipping quite fast. We were shipping a lot faster. So it felt like, you work on a personal project, if you're working on a blog or whatever, or writing some code in your own time, it seems to go faster. And it had that kind of feeling. It felt like we had a lot more momentum than I was used to. But I didn't really question it too much. And it was only till I came to Zoopla afterwards, where I went back to Scrum, that I really started to see the value of ShapeUp, and I was kind of like, oh no, this way of working was actually super interesting. So it was a strange way to come about it, and yeah, you'd think that for some people it might just be a huge shift and it feels great, but for me, I didn't pay too much attention to it until I started to go back to Scrum.
Yeah, interesting. There's this song comes to mind. What's it? It's by Counting Crows. This you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
That's
Um,
true. That's a great great analogy for that.
I well, you mentioned what you noticed at the startup was that because of ShapeUp, felt like you were shipping faster, and to some people, I think in the broadly, let's call it Scrum camp or Agile camp, that's gonna feel like a contradiction, right? Because the cycle and the rhythm of ShapeUp is 6 weeks, whereas a typical Scrum cycle would be 2 weeks, and you are expected to finish like a self-contained piece of work in Scrum after 2 weeks, much faster than 6 weeks, right? I mean,
Yeah.
how does that not match maybe your actual experience that you've had?
So Scrum can absolutely work for teams. There's a reason why it's an industry standard, and there's a reason why it's been used so widely. It can be great, but it's not always great. and there's definitely a trap which some teams can fall into, and that trap can be things like a backlog, which becomes a kind of dumping ground for tickets. And the sprints which you mentioned, the 2 week sprints, carrying them over. If your tickets, the point of it is to finish that and move on to the next one. But what's the reality of that? Does that actually happen? And a lot of the time, it's too short to actually either you're looking for work towards the end of it, or you're carrying work over. And that's not always the case. As I said, there's a bunch of teams that work well with this, and it's not a problem for them. But I have seen it a bunch of times in my career where you just carry tickets over, and it's just this infinite kind of just next sprint, next sprint, next sprint, next sprint.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, your original question where you're asking, why aren't people necessarily shipping within that 2 weeks? It's that kind of too short of a time frame to make trade-offs. With Shape Up, you have that 6 week cycle. It's long enough where you can see the end, and it's enough time to make trade-offs along the way. I feel like with that 2 week sprint, it's too short. And obviously in Shape Up, yes, the cycle length can change. 6 weeks is quite nice, and we're going to experiment, I think, with changing up the cycle length. But the 2 week sprints is are you falling into that Scrum trap, or are they working well for you? I think is the key here.
Yeah, I mean, just from personal experience, that resonates completely. I'd love to understand how, when you joined the team that was already using ShapeUp, how did they onboard you into the framework? Did they make you read the book, or did they have like a custom doc that had all the nuts and bolts of it?
Yeah, so I remember speaking to the head of product at the time, and he said, "Have you heard of ShapeUp?" And I said, "Nope." He said, "Oh, we've got this kind of internal document which just had, like you say, the nuts and bolts, just a kind of breakdown." I glanced over at it, and he said, "Oh, there's another talk which you can listen to." I think it was probably one of Ryan's talks. Mm-hmm. And I kind of, I glanced over it, but I didn't get invested in it too much because I didn't need to. We already had the kind of pitching process nailed down. We had the cycle length nailed down. We had a lot of things that you would need to consider if you're setting up fresh. That was already established, and that's great because it means that you don't. I think it would be quite a high barrier to entry if with Shape Up all engineers had to know the book inside out. I don't think it would scale well, and I think it would be really difficult to implement. And you can see it's being adopted a lot, and I think that's a sign that once you get all these things in place, engineers can kind of just go along with it, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's where I was leaning with my question was there a speed bump, or is it really easy in just glancing over something and going, yep, I can, put me on a team coach?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is that it's the latter. You can just kind of jump right into it. I think if you're trying to move from another way of working to it, it's more complicated. And I think there's things that you need to consider, and there's a lot of stuff to kind of set up and get your head around if somebody is probably doing that. And there would have definitely been, a moment when that startup began where they had considered ways of working, and they would have had to, educate the CEOs of the company and say, this is where it's valuable. All of that stuff was done for me. And that's kind of cool because I'm just an engineer. I want to write code. I love writing code. I love solving problems with code. And I think if you have to do a lot of work to make Shape Up work, it may not be the right framework. But for the instances where I've used it, it has been really valuable. So that's how I would,
Yeah, I mean, now you are kind of that person working to implement Shape Up, right? In a way. So maybe that's a good time to start about, you land at Zoopla, and you're back in Scrum land. What were you thinking? What was your experience there, and what sparked Shape Up to consider Shape Up for you?
Yeah, so I joined, and it was a super talented team of engineers. There was a bunch of really great people, and I think when you join somewhere, even if you're a huge fan of Shape Up, you don't want to walk in the door and go, "Hey, everybody, I have this really great way of working. Let's do this. Let's change everything," because you don't know how they're working. You don't know what works for them. You need to kind of you need to pay attention to what they're doing and see what's coming up in their retros. What are the pain points? And to be honest, Scrum wasn't working. It wasn't working too badly for the team I was in. It's quite a senior heavy team. We were definitely shipping, but we had fallen into that Scrum trap in places where we were, carrying tickets over, and I felt like there was. It wasn't that we were working in a bad way, I think, and I think that's quite important to come across, because sometimes you go into a place and you're like, this we need a drastic change here. It wasn't that there wasn't that we didn't need to do it, but I could see from having worked in it before that there was loads of value that we could get from it. And I think the first thing which made me want to suggest it was I'd been working there a few months, and it was over the Christmas break that when we came back, one of our engineers said, "Oh, I did loads of work over Christmas because nobody was bothering me."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." So like we have this really skilled bunch of engineers who are capable of shipping really fast and shipping really well and writing lots of really good code. So there's a blocker here. Something is blocking them from being able to do that faster. Like, can we just do this all the time? Can we get that kind of Christmas break feeling all the time?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I kind of thought, okay, I'd mentioned Shape Up to the team really kind of ad hoc. I just kind of said, oh, maybe we should look towards this. And then I thought, okay, it's time. I need to actually put some time in, read back through the book, really understand it, and I want to present it to the team as this is going to be a fundamental shift in the way of working, but it's going to be really valuable for us. So people can come to Shape Up and they could have had really big problems. I don't think our team had huge problems at all.
Yeah.
Which is good, because it almost makes that transition to Shape Up a lot easier. I think if you're so far really struggling with Scrum and things are going in the completely the wrong direction, is there work to do to move towards Shape Up? Maybe. Can you just go straight into it? I don't know. I haven't worked in enough places that use it to give you a good answer for that. But we were working okay, which made transitioning to it a lot easier.
Interesting. I talked to a bunch of teams where they do feel stronger pain, and then Shape Up was a fix. But I've also, to be fair, I've also heard stories where it was more looking for upside than kind of fixing things. So that's definitely cool. I'd love to understand, because you mentioned you first dropped it kind of ad hoc, but then you had this process of, okay, now I want to pitch this and give it a real shot. How did you structure that pitch? What were you anchoring it on?
So I kind of went down the route of, these are really common problems that software engineers face, and we have a few of these problems. One of them was that we were spending almost an entire day on agile ceremonies every 2 weeks. So of every 10 days that we're working, almost an entire day is spent on retros, refining, and we try to make them as fun as possible, but there are certain things that bring me joy. Like, I really enjoy writing code. I love solving problems. I've mentioned that.
Yeah.
I don't wake up and go, oh, great, I can't wait to add some acceptance criteria to a ticket which says change the border from #CCC to #DDD. It doesn't bring me joy. So there was, I'm an engineer pitching to other engineers and also to product. So there's two strands. So there's one, product need to understand the value and how it can really help them. And there's also the engineers. It's like, how does that affect your day to day? So I wanted to make it really good, and I was quite serious about it. So I put together like a full presentation. I read back through the book. I made a bunch of notes. We actually had an upcoming project which would have been the perfect fit for this. So I was pitching it as, let's trial this for this project. It was a perfect fit because we were building a developer portal, and a developer portal, the audience and the problem we're trying to solve is engineers, which we are. So it's kind of the ideal, and it's brand new. So it's the ideal project for this. So I kind of went in, I put quite a big space in the calendar to answer questions, and there were a lot of questions. But I put together a presentation. I went through that presentation kind of in detail. I tried to be as passionate as possible. Because I was passionate, I really wanted to give it a try because I thought it could be great. And
I love that you thought about the audience in terms of product and developers. What were you pitching to the product side of, like, I guess to the product manager on the team? What was
so
their upset going to be?
I think the good thing for them, there's a couple of really great things from Shape Up from a product perspective, and that's why you commonly get product heads
Yeah.
of product and product trying to implement it. It doesn't always come from engineers, and the upside, and it's quite an easy sell to product because we'd kind of missed our quarterly objectives from the last quarter, and we were rolling into this next quarter, and the upsell of, hey, we're going to work in a 6-week cycle. I think we can pretty much get our entire quarterly objectives done if we purely focus on solving one problem, is
Mm-hmm.
a great thing to suggest, because they're going, how do we get stuff out the door? How do we ship a lot of value to our customers? And if you can offer a solution for that, even if it's just a trial, great. Immediately, like there's a huge upside to that, especially if you're working in quarters. If you're working in quarters and you're saying, hey, actually, we can probably ship most of this in about 6 weeks. There's
Yeah.
trade-offs that you need to give us that focus time. You need to kind of protect the team in some way.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of product, from a product perspective, it's super valuable, and also giving the team autonomy. So getting engineers really involved in making those trade-offs, so they don't have to be involved in the day-to-day, because product going to stand up every day, does that need to be there?
Yeah.
I mean, we'll get into it later, I'm sure, but we have a product check-in where we can discuss our trade-offs with product once a week, but that's not in the book. That's just something we decided to do, but it means that product can then think strategically about their product. So
Yeah.
it frees up time for them as well as for engineers, which is great.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just out of, again, personal experience, it resonates so much. Where as a PM, you're also often filling this PO role in a Scrum process and having to just in time deliver the next batch of things to do, and it's you're always thinking about the next one because it starts so soon, and then all of a sudden you have 6 weeks of breathing room for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
you mentioned that you put something on the calendar to give this passionate pitch, and that there were a lot of questions. I love to understand what the main themes of those questions were.
Yeah, and every time I talk about Shape Up, because I've given this kind of presentation to a few different teams now, and the same questions definitely come up, even if you go through them in the presentation. And the most common one is bugs. What do we do? Like, we have
Mm-hmm.
all of this stuff. We have all this stuff that we're doing. Like, what do we do with those? And there's a couple of answers, and there's a thing that we had to do, which is not in the book. And when it came to bugs, it's exactly as it mentioned in the book. So the answer is just, can it go in the cooldown? Do we need to do this right now? Is it more important than the value that this product cycle is bringing?
Yeah.
But we were in a kind of unique situation where we had a bunch of manual tasks that we were doing day to day. We were moving towards automating them all, and to be honest, we're quite close to that point now. And they can't just go away. We can't push them to a cooldown period because they have
Yeah.
an immediate customer impact. And I think you have to look at things, and it says it in the book, to take parts of it which are great, but also you don't have to do it exactly by the book every time.
Yeah.
So we had basically somebody on the bench. So one person for the first cycle who was basically just picking up these day-to-day tasks, and we were trying to frame it in a way of, don't just pick up bugs, come back to the cycle if you're not doing them, try and be involved in the team. But it did protect the entire team to focus on that one problem, and it was super valuable because we saw that value. We saw that what happens if we focus and what happens if we don't get distracted by bugs.
Yeah.
And we're moving towards not having that person at all. We've had that kind of person for the last few cycles, but gradually that role is becoming more and more redundant as we become more mature.
Interesting. Because was there somebody volunteering for that role, or was it a shortest straw kind of situation?
Someone volunteered very kindly, because it's not. I mean, I definitely wouldn't love to take on that role. It's not the most enjoyable thing to do, but it was really valuable also because it highlighted what we were actually doing day to day.
Hmm.
Whereas before it was split between the teams, so there was no real way of quantifying how many day to day distracting tasks are we doing. If one person's doing it and you can monitor what that person is doing every day, you can kind of go,
Yeah.
oh, all of this stuff was a huge distraction for the team. Maybe that's why we weren't shipping on time. And it really highlights that. But yeah, I did feel definitely very sorry, and the team were extremely appreciative of that person. And
Cool.
actually, for the future cycles, we split that role. So we've done 3 week, because 6 weeks
Oh,
is a long time for one person to be doing it.
I mean, it is interesting, and you've mentioned it in the beginning that in your words, said you're working with a great bunch of engineers, and what I've seen that great kind of translate to is, at least for ShapeUp, having a pragmatic mindset and taking ownership of what you do and wanting to be involved in the what is the product that we're building. Whereas I think that's totally fair for someone to have a different role where they just love being in in some teams you have this solution engineering role where you're just there to cater to these one-offs from B2B customers and so on. So and actually I just spoke with Stefan Bönnemann Valenta at Prosperity Solutions in the last episode, and he mentioned how now that they have these distinctive roles, that engineers are super happy to be able to say, I'm more of a solution engineer, I'm more of a product engineer. Do you see something in your team as well, or are you just all laser focused and wanting to build product?
I think I mean, it's quite difficult because I'm primarily a front end engineer, and
Mm-hmm.
sadly, this role has mostly been it's quite back end focused.
Yeah,
So we, the two front end engineers on our team, me being one of them, haven't really had to jump into that.
got
I
it.
mean, I love the product engineering side. I'm very product focused. I can't
Yeah.
speak for the rest of the team. I'd have to ask them. But
Mm-hmm.
people don't seem to be, completely averse to doing that role, especially as it becomes less and less time consuming. We've actually throughout the cycles we've been working towards automating a lot of that manual effort which that role had. So when it comes to fixing bugs, there is something which is quite satisfying about this customer's having this problem with blah blah
Yeah,
blah. I'm just going to ship a fix, and then you
yeah,
get this great message saying, "Oh, we've thank you so much for fixing this and
yeah,
turning it around
exactly.
so quickly." And there's something satisfying about that. Absolutely, it's just how does that work in your workflow? How does that work with your cycles and the other product vision and the other things that are also super valuable? It's weighing it up and getting the right balance.
Yeah, for sure. And then if you have the space for it, you feel good about saying yes to these requests, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Cool. You mentioned how kind of everything came together where you were in the perfect situation because you were just looking to start work on the developer portal. Was it then you also that wrote the first pitch, or how did that work out?
So this is another thing that we didn't do exactly by the book because it's quite difficult if you're coming to brand new with an entire organization which is working in Scrum to do something against the grain and completely
Yeah.
different. So you have to be pragmatic, like you say. So for the first pitch, we collectively did it. So in the book, I know it's supposed to have representatives from design, representatives from engineering, representatives from product. It happened to align with our quarterly product planning. So we have a thing called big room planning where we look at the quarter and we look at what we're going to do, and that's something they already had in place. So the beginning of the first cycle, we worked mostly remotely, but we were all together in one room. So the
Hmm.
actual first pitch doc was, here's the problem. And the problem was that we have a bunch of third parties who want to integrate with our solution, and we don't have a platform for that. So we want to provide something where people can like ingest our APIs, they can read docs, and create integrations to go into our marketplace. And
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking this is perfect because like we have a full understanding of the problem because we are
Hmm.
engineers. We are, if we were working for another company, we could come to this and say what does good look like.
Yeah.
So we had that quarterly planning. We're all in one room. So we did that kind of finding the elements bit before. So we went through and we sketched out that really high level customer journey. So, they need to land on a page, they need to log in, they need to register, forget password, they need to create an integration, these really high level things. So that would be a part of the process anyway. And then we went into that slightly more detailed, getting the right amount of detail, finding the elements where we were going, okay, we're on a page that's got a form, it submits the form, we've got a bunch of questions here, like, does the name need to be unique? What do we do about errors? All of these things that naturally would occur in a pitch doc. And the appetite was an easy one as well, because we were just going to trial it in a 6-week cycle. We were just going to say, let's just see what happens. Let's see how this goes for the first one. The appetite is really meaningful when you get more mature and once you've done it a bit more. But for the first one, certainly we were kind of just like, let's stick with 6 weeks. 6 weeks. It seems like the golden amount of time. So let's just see how this works. That original pitch doc came about as more of a workshop. And I think that's okay. It did have the entire team. I know they talk about, you don't want to distract the entire team when you're doing these as it progresses. But for the first iteration, being all in one room and working in that way, it was super collaborative and it was great. And I think that's a good thing about Shape Up. You don't have to just have 2 engineers and the rest of them can't do it because, of whatever reason. Let's be pragmatic. What's valuable, what works for your team. And if people getting involved in that workshop process, especially because they are the customer, if that works for you, then great. Like, it's not a huge amount of time outside. It gets you more engaged with the product.
Yeah, for sure. And I understand, though, that it was all this time still you leading all this endeavor, or did you try to shoulder the pressure of, for example, running such a workshop? So that takes effort.
Yeah, I wasn't really running it as a Shape Up thing because we were kind of doing it anyway. So it was super easy. So we had product and we had delivery at the time, kind of really helping out with that workshop. So I didn't actually, the effort came when we were trying to figure out, what does day to day look like? What's the hill chart? What's the scope? What's the task? Like that kind of area of it, which is more Shape Up than just it was. I know they don't talk about, we don't use planning in the book, but just finding the elements, it was quite easy because we were kind of doing that anyway. So we were in a really great position to just do that and for it not to be very disruptive and just kind of roll into it, which was a really nice way to ease into Shape Up.
Yeah, and I imagine that just having everybody in the room also for the first cycle for sure gives everybody the understanding of what does it look like to find a good level of abstraction, not too deep, not too high.
Exactly.
Because then down the line they are going to get a similar input for the next cycle, right? And then something where if you're coming from Scrum and maybe you're more used to getting spoon-fed acceptance criteria, this isn't that with Shape Up, but you've seen firsthand how the shaped package gets made then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I still think we're still working to get this pitching process right. Like, we're still not there. But that's okay. I think you have to accept that you're not going to get it perfect first cycle. You might not get it perfect second cycle. You've got to work towards it. And that's kind of interestingly why we kept one of the agile ceremonies, which was retrospective, but we just do it every 8 weeks. So it's not particularly tight, instead of every 2 weeks where you can't get stuff done. How do you create a good feedback loop? I mean, I'm sure there are other solutions, but retrospective is a good feedback loop. It's, how's this working? What can we improve? Can we get our pitching process better? Was there anything that was too distracting? What can we do in the next cycle? It's fine. I think you can definitely pull stuff in like that. It's what works for your team is the kind of key takeaway for me.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, I hope you're enjoying the conversation. I wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening and to let you know about the Shapers and Builders job board. On shapers.builders, yes, that's the domain, you'll find jobs in software development, design, product management, and other roles at companies that work with Shape Up. Many of these roles are remote, and teams who use Shape Up generally run at a more sustainable, healthy, and meaningful pace than the hamster wheel of 2-week sprints. So if you're looking for a job in tech or trying to find great people, head over to the Shapers and Builders job board at shapers.builders. Now let's turn back to the conversation. I think that's a good point to look a bit at where you are now. So I'd love to just get the elements of your implementation of ShapeUp that you have now after, what is it, 3 cycles?
Yeah, so we're kind of mid-third cycle. So it's still really new for us. It's quite an interesting point to talk about it because we've taken some learnings. We've got a lot of learning to do. There's a lot that we're not doing that we can do better, and there's a lot that we've done which has been super valuable.
So let's pick those apart.
Yeah, cool.
Where do you want to start? Things that worked or things that you're still struggling with?
Let's start with the positive. So things that worked. Things that worked. So the first iteration of this was hugely successful. We had delivered our developer portal within that time frame, and product was super happy. The engineers were super happy because we had all this focus time, and we were really involved in coming up with a decent solution. So making those trade-offs along the way was great. I think we started with, I think it was 10 scopes and 30 something tasks, and we ended up with 15 scopes and 80 something tasks, and we'd completed, I think, 55 or 60 tasks or something, and the rest were kind of nice to have. And that's a great sign that we were making trade-offs along the way. We were going, this isn't important, or this is hugely time consuming and not that valuable. Doing that to be able to release it in 6 weeks was something we hadn't done properly before. So we were that was great. It was really interesting to use it for a project where the whole team was super engaged. So product loved it. The engineers loved it. We had a few kind of pain points around tooling, but it's not really super relevant to talk about that, I think, for this podcast, because it's, there's easy ways to solve the tooling point. But most of the stuff that came out of the retrospective was super positive. It was, it feels really refreshing to do this. Cool. So that was really nice. We then moved into the cool down phase where we were able to do a bunch of kind of tech health, which was really nice. Still think we've got work to do on our cool downs, but we can talk about that.
Yeah.
And then the second cycle that we did, again, it worked really well. We had the whole team for both of these cycles. We had our entire team of 10 working in the cycle, and that is quite different to the book. So the book is, and one thing that I'd love to get to is spinning up and spinning down teams. So who do you need for this? Just get the people in that you need for it. And then for the next cycle, what have we got? What's valuable? Who do you need for it? That works really well at an organization level. It's quite difficult to do at a team level if you've only got 10 engineers. But in our third cycle, we have done that. We have actually split the team into 2. We had one really back-end heavy kind of value proposition, and we had one that was really heavy on the UI with a little bit of back-end. So we've split the team into 2. And that's where you really start to see a lot of product value, because you've got, oh, hey, we're not just doing one thing in 6 weeks. We've got 2 separate strands. So we're shipping more, we're shipping faster, we're shipping more regularly. So I think it's worked so far. It's worked really well for us. I think there's still things that we want to change, and there's still learnings that we're taking along the way. Absolutely. But I think people have seen the value, and other teams have kind of been going, oh, what's this team doing? What is this shape up thing? So I've
why do they look so happy?
So what is this really fresh looking engineer doing over here? So I think overall it's been super positive. I think we've had a lot more focus time. I think we've shipped a lot of value, which is really what we want to get to. So I think we're healthier and we're happier than we were before. In terms of what doesn't work so well, what we're still figuring out, we need to nail down our pitching process a little bit better, I think. At the moment, we're still working with kind of this quarterly objective thing, which is going on in the rest of the company. And it's, how does our shape up cycles, how does that fit into that? How do you leave time to get customer feedback and understand what's valuable? So we've got work to do there. And I think that at the moment, the kind of pitches aren't, the engineers aren't pitching as much. We can come to
Mhm.
product and say, hey, we've got this great idea, but it tends to be smaller things that we just want to do in cool down,
Yeah.
less big cycles. I think there's some work to do around like nailing down that pitching process and getting close, like even closer to the problem than we currently are. But that also comes with time. It's, we can reflect on that and we can say, hey, what did this pitch look like? What could we have done differently if we were to do this pitch again? So
Yeah.
it's, what does your feedback loop look like? Have you got a healthy feedback loop? Can you speak to product? We're really lucky because our product, our head of product is really loves it too. She's really passionate about
Hmm.
it. So she's really open to listening to ideas from the team. And that's really healthy. It's great because you don't want somebody, I think, if you have product coming to you with just, hey, let's do shape up,
Yeah.
it can be kind of, as an engineer, you're like, oh, it's another thing that we've got to do. It doesn't really feel like
Yeah.
that. If you have a really
Yeah.
healthy, if you have a healthy feedback loop with product, it's, it's great. So we just keep going, keep doing those retros after every cycle, getting feedback. What can we do differently? So
Yeah.
we've got work to do around our pitching process, and I think we've got work to do around our cooldowns as well, because I think they're supposed to be a little bit more. Engineers have a bit of breathing space to just pick
Yeah.
up things, but I don't think we're at that point at the moment. I think we're potentially trying to do too much in a cooldown period, and then it just looks like a sprint, and you're back
Hmm.
at where you were. So I think we've got work to do to improve that, and to create more breathing space, more learning space, and just focus on getting those kind of bigger cycle pitches looking really nice for the team. So yeah, we've got work to do there, and also we don't want to have this bench person role forever. It's
Yeah.
not really a thing. It's not really a part of the book. It's not really. Um, I don't know.
But it
I
is
think
an implementation that a lot of people, a lot of teams naturally gravitated towards. So literally, I don't know, I would say 8 out of 10 teams that I speak with, they have this on-call person, they call it, or
that's super interesting.
rotation. Yeah.
That's good to know
Yeah.
because I took this from my last company who had the same thing. I was like, this isn't mentioned
See?
anywhere, but maybe that's just because I think when Basecamp have done this right, it's a very it's worked for them without that. They don't necessarily need that role, and that's great. But
Exactly.
it's like, what's the reality of other teams who are working in a Scrum way? Like, how does that transition look? Is it okay
Yeah.
to have roles like this just while you're working towards something? I think it absolutely is. And some
Yeah.
products just have more bugs. They just have more day-to-day tasks. If your product is
Exactly.
13 years old, you're gonna have bugs. There's gonna be stuff. You can't ignore it. You can't go, hey, we've got this really great way of working. Sorry, we're not going to do any bugs. It doesn't work like
Yeah.
that. So how does it work
Exactly.
in reality?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's just yeah, like you mentioned, it wasn't the reality at Basecamp, so it wasn't in the first book. But I think generally, I think it's been acknowledged that this, Ryan even has this course now that he's calling Shaping in Real Life. So and he's stressing that with this course, I think,
That's cool.
that you have to tailor shape up, and you're encouraged to. One thing you mentioned, you're still iterating on the pitching process and feeling like engineering is moving too far from that. um, have you discussed ideas for how to rectify that, or what are your thoughts on getting
Yeah.
back?
So I'm actually talking to product this afternoon. Probably should have
Oh wow.
recorded this podcast tomorrow about a few ideas as to how we
Hmm.
can like kind of nail that down. Because the bets are quite interesting because the bets work really well if loads of teams are working in shape up, and you can basically go,
Hmm.
here's a bunch of bets, CTO or whoever's in the room, what do you think? What's really important from a kind of the direct strategic direction of the product?
Yeah.
Um, we kind of work where product will have a rough idea that it was based on customer feedback. It's not just we want to do this thing. We have a huge, kind of user UX team, user research. We have a lot of data on how people are using our product. So
Yeah.
they already have an idea as to what's valuable. But the problem with that is that I think the teams are sometimes more detached from that problem space. So in the Scrum world, where you're just picking up tickets, you're very detached from that space.
Yeah.
You're kind of, just looking at what's my piece of the puzzle. I've got to change the button color. I keep using that example, but like, and that wasn't what we didn't have a button color with ACs, don't worry. But you're quite detached from the problem, and it's how do we get closer to the problem? So like, how do we get that kind of user research? How do we understand how people are using this product? Because it's a big product, and product have a big understanding, and they have that strategic direction. It's like, as engineers, I think there is value in us understanding that, because when we're making trade-offs, the more we understand the original problem, the better calls we're going to make. Because we can go, this customer is having a problem here, and actually this part of this scope doesn't really contribute to that, so we can make that trade-off if we have better access to the original problem, if we have a better pitch doc. So betting, I think we're quite far off getting an actual betting table set up. I think that's okay. I think I've kind of accepted that getting a betting table would be quite far in the future. We'd have to have a lot of different teams working in it.
Yeah.
And also it's a complex system with loads of domains. Betting table can work great if you're in a startup and you've got a brand new product. Easy. Yeah. It's there from the start. Keep doing it. If you've got a 13-year-old product, it's harder to get a betting table set up, I think. I mean, it can be done. I'm sure you've chatted to people who have done that and done it well, but I think we're not there yet. I think there's work to do if we wanted to get towards that place.
So what ideas are you going to pitch if you want to share?
So I want to nail down what a good pitch looks like. So there's sometimes at the moment it's a little bit of a kind of mishmash of, this is part of a design, but the team haven't breadboarded it, or maybe we have breadboarded it for some pitches. And it's kind of, how do we, like, what processes can we put in place where it's the same process every time? The document looks the same every time. We're not getting, for the last cycle, we were kind of falling into that trap of where we had more of a finished design before we start. And that means we are more detached from the problem space. And it's like, how do we avoid things like that? Because we did it really well for the first cycle. How do we make that work for every cycle? So those are the ideas I want to kind of come in with and say, how do we get a really nice pitch doc, and what's the right amount of detail? How do we define that? Because at the moment it's a bit unknown what level of detail we're going to get when we start, if that makes sense. So we really need to nail that down.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can see that trap of now I'm going off on, I'm speculating, but I can see a trap of where in the second cycle or in follow-up cycles, you're like, all right, now I'm going to write one big thing, but again, I'm just going to write it myself. I'm going to hand it over and not leverage that involvement that was so great in the first one.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also, how do you do that really nicely in a remote setup? Because the first one, we're in a room, we've got some whiteboards, people are really engaged. How do you keep people engaged? How do you get them really excited about the problem? How do we do that for all the pitches? Because the first one, it's a brand new product, so people are already excited anyway because it's fresh and new. Like, if you're going back to iterate on something, it can be less exciting. So how do you make that exciting? How do you get people involved? And it could just be as simple as, what's the data? What's the usage like of this current product? What's some of the feedback we're getting? Let's have a look at that raw feedback. And, some engineers are super interested in that because they're like, we made the trade-off and this person doesn't like this thing or whatever it is. I think it can be really helpful for us to move a bit closer. So I'm curious I kind of want to get the few things to answer your original question is, I'd love to get the problem fleshed out more, so we have a little bit more detail about the problem. I'd love to see the appetite actually considered as not necessarily a 6-week cycle, because in our current cycle we've got 2 strands, but the second strand is really, we'll probably work with 3-week cycles. There's nothing which says you have to keep doing 6 weeks. Because then you don't want to fall into the trap of it being a 6-week sprint or something silly. So you kind of want to always question, what is the appetite? So nail down the problem, nail down the appetite, get the right amount of detail for the solution, and also create more time for the risks and rabbit holes. Because at the moment, we can call out risks and rabbit holes and we can say this is a problem, but we might not actually have time to investigate it. For the first one, we did, and we were able to get that thin-tailed chart of, when we're going to ship, really thin. We've gone into a couple of them where it may not be as thin-tailed. It's how do we make that thin-tailed? Like, how can we improve that? So I kind of want to, improve that entire process, get that pitching process really watertight, and obviously iterate on it, get feedback on it. Ask engineers, do you think you had enough detail? Did you have too much detail? Find what works for us. And even if it ends up being not the same as what's called out in the book, that's okay. Maybe we do need a few more detail in certain areas. Maybe we need less in other areas. I think that's fine. It's just it's finding, okay, engineers, what do you think? Product, what do you think? Like, what do you want? What do you want to get out of this? What's valuable? Constantly asking that, what's valuable for us? How do we ship better? How do we ship faster? How does our day-to-day look? Constantly asking those questions and making it really good is kind of key. That's where I want to get to. It's like getting a good feedback loop and getting the teams really engaged.
I mean, it's clear to see your passion for this, and I want to just get into that topic a bit more, where you come in as the new guy, and after just a few months, you have the audacity to suggest switching the way of working in a way. What do you attribute it to that you were feeling confident to step up and suggest these things?
I think it was a mixture of I knew like how good it could be for us, as in I knew that if we really, because I knew that everybody was really talented. I knew we had quite a senior heavy team, which shape up. It's I mean, you can absolutely roll it out to less experienced engineers, but it works very well quite quickly, I think, if you've got a senior team who are questioning things already. So kind of, I guess what gave me the audacity to suggest it was just, not going in with everybody, look at this amazing thing, we have to do it like this forever. It was, let's try it, let's see how it works. Like, here's an idea. These are some of the pain points that we have. Let's address those pain points by just changing the way that we're working, because we've been doing retrospectives every 2 weeks, which is quite a short amount of time. And yes, you can change the retrospective length, but you can't meaningfully change anything in a 2-week period, I don't think. Maybe you can. Maybe that works for some teams, and that's great. But for us, just keeping to iterate on Scrum. Just didn't
keep iterating.
Keep iterating on Scrum. It wasn't working. So just going in and saying, hey, like, here's how it would work for us. Here's how it would work with our upcoming project. What do you think? What are your concerns? Like, do you want to give it a trial? And I basically said, so that nobody was being called out on the call, I said, just private message me and say, are you up for giving this a go? So then I just had my Slack open. I was just waiting for messages, hoping that nobody going, no, I'm not comfortable with this. Fortunately, people were like really open-minded and up for giving it a try. But it can be hard if you go into a team and team's been working in a particular way for a while. It can be hard to go in and say, you don't want to be the person that goes in and says, I've got better ideas. And that's not the case. Like, it wasn't, I don't have better ideas. It's saying, hey, I've come across this before. Why don't we give it a try? Let's just see how it goes. If it doesn't work, we just go back to it. I think some people are a bit scared to jump into Shape Up because they think, what if it doesn't work? It's like, well, you're not going to not ship anything. You're still going to ship something. It's just, even if you don't hit that 6-week marker, find out why you didn't. What was your shaping process like, and make it better. You don't have to, you don't have to do it by the book all the time. It doesn't have to work first time. If it doesn't work for you, then go back to the other way. What's the downside? There isn't really one. So kind of selling it in more as a, let's just try it out and see if it works. And fortunately, it worked for us, which is good. I would have been quite sad if we had to go back to Scrum.
I can understand that. We're coming up a bit on time, and I want to make sure to there's one thing I want to hear of you, which is you've now rolled it out to one team, your team, and you've started experimenting with splitting the team, which is kind of having more teams of Shape Up in a way, I guess. But how are you thinking about rolling it out beyond the original team?
Yeah, so I'd love to see us getting it more at an organization level, even if it's just for Alto, which is our kind of business to business product. I think it would be quite difficult to do that across both products. I think it's okay to just do it per product, as in if you had Shape Up, if most of the teams in Alto were working in Shape Up, you'd really have the ability to go, you know, this we could get these engineers working on this, we could get these engineers, we could get engineers pitching to a different level of person. You know, there's a lot of, I think, a lot of value in having that. But also other teams, you know, Scrum may be working okay for them, and if it's working for them, and you know they're getting what they need to done, and they're happy, then you know you can keep doing it. But the good thing, well, I guess a couple of teams have reached out and said, could you come and talk to us about Shape Up? And I presented the idea to the directors, the CTO already, had some really great conversations and some good feedback from them. And I've been given the green light to help facilitate adoption for other teams. So if other teams want to try it, I can be there to run a workshop or an education session to help guide them for their first cycle, and kind of do a Q&A, which is super helpful, because I do think that it can be tricky if you haven't worked like this before and you don't have anybody guiding you. I think it's actually quite hard. I don't know. I mean, maybe you've had conversations with people where they have done it and they haven't worked like it before, but I think it would be tough. I think it'd be really tough if a team just went, we're doing Shape Up, and hadn't experienced it.
Yeah, bottom up for sure. I think the cases where I've seen it work was where the head of engineering, someone in a leadership role is coming in and saying, we're going to try this. And then it's kind of a mandate, right, of sorts. But yeah, bottom up.
Bottom up. Yeah, which is actually, I mean, you can look at it as a good or a bad thing. It's good because we have the flexibility to work in a way that works for us. If it was mandated the way that we work, I'd have to go to, leadership and say, hey, let's change the way we're working for every team. And it might not work well for some teams. It might work well for other teams. Then what do you do? Whereas if you have the flexibility to understand what works for your team, and then show that value to other teams and roll it out that way, it's a little bit more kind of organic. It can feel like you can demonstrate that value to leadership rather than mandating it. And I think that's quite a neat approach to rolling something like this out. So even if no other teams work like this, and I know there are teams who are, I think, going to trial it already, so I know that's not the case, but even if nobody didn't, it was just working for our team, there's still value in that. Like, I'm happier day to day. Like, we've got a really nice iterative approach to our product. And that's quite selfish, but it's good, I think, if you're passionate about it, to also speak to other teams and say, hey, like, I'm here if you want to like go over any concerns, questions, let's talk about it. And I know there's one team who are just going to work towards it. Like, they're quite heavily on the Scrum side, and they'd like to use it, but they feel like it might be too soon. So it's like, okay, let's focus on vertical slices of our work and some of the themes of Shape Up, but not doing it and then moving towards it. And that's okay too. I think there's no right answer for this stuff. And I think if you look at Shape Up and say, this is the only way, this is the right way, this works for every team, I think that would be a mistake. I think if you come to it and take everything, like take really great learnings from the book, it's 15 years of Basecamp or whatever it is, huge amounts of experience, wealth of knowledge there, a lot of learnings. But that's what worked really well for Basecamp. There's nothing which says you can't take stuff from this that works for your team and apply it to your team, because take learnings, find what works for you, and you'll have a kind of happier, healthier product, I think.
Yeah, for sure. You briefly mentioned now getting to talk to the CTO and leadership about Shape Up. What were they concerned about?
I think the concerns were, what's wrong with the Scrum process? As in, like, because it's obviously, there's a reason why it's an industry standard, and there's a reason why a lot of teams work with it. And some of the great challenges which I wasn't actually really expecting, was, can you like take a radical approach with Scrum? Can you fix it with Scrum? Could you shorten, could you have, you don't have nothing which says you have to have those ceremonies every 2 weeks. Why can't you just have a ceremony every 4 weeks? And it was really great conversations about that. And it's actually super nice to hear different people's perspectives and some really great challenges about which I hadn't even considered. And I didn't have great answers for at the time. And I was kind of, I guess my main response was, if we're finding a way that works really well for us, even if it's could be fixed with Scrum, then what's the difference? If we've got a really nice way which kind of works for us, why fix it with Scrum if there's something else which can, even if it doesn't solve all of our problems, if it solves some of our problems, what's the harm in having it? And I think they were really receptive to that feedback. And we just had some really healthy conversations about it. And, they've all read, I wrote a blog post about our experience and posted it on our engineering blog, and a few people have picked up on that and asked a lot of questions. And I actually really enjoy having conversations with people about it. I really enjoy the questions that they ask.
Me too.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, you have a podcast about it, so I would hope so. But I love talking about it, and I love kind of hearing people's perspectives. And I actually really like it when people challenge it and question it.
Yeah,
and it really helps you kind of ask the right questions about, is this, what could we do about this approach? Like, that's an interesting perspective. And I love hearing people's perspective, and I love hearing what they think of it and how it's worked for them.
Yeah, I think I'm speculating, but what I've just from my experience, I've heard leadership be concerned about in having multiple ways of working inside an org is moving people from one side to the other and having, not having a shared understanding. But you've kind of partially also addressed this fear in the very beginning when you were like, I got dropped into a shape up team. It didn't take me long to figure out what I had to do. Like, it's not rocket science.
Yeah. I think, I guess one of the, and this isn't a criticism from Zoopla, but one thing that comes up quite frequently, and I'm sure you've had this discussion, is what if the engineers are less experienced? Like, can they make trade-offs? Does it scale well to teams that are less experienced? And I think it is a really valid point, because when you get to senior level engineers, you've naturally made trade-offs in your time in one way or another. You may not have called them trade-offs, but you've had to make calls and you've questioned things. Hopefully, once you get to that level, you're hopefully used to pushing back and questioning and all of the stuff which really helps when you're working in a cycle and you have to make those trade-offs. How does it work for engineers who it may be their first time making trade-offs? And I guess, like, my response would be, don't just give it to a team of less experienced engineers. Have some senior representatives, work with them, like, have a conversation, maybe let them do some shaping, see how they go, feedback on that, kind of guide them. And there's always learning. And I think that's the case for anything you do. If you want your more mid-level engineers to become senior, it's good to guide, it's good to provide feedback, it's good to, and it can just be a part of that process. It's, if they want to learn and they're keen to learn, then why not give it a try? Like, it doesn't matter if you don't get it right first time. Nothing's going to explode. It's software. It's fine. You'll survive. Look at the kind of bigger picture and try and explain to them what the value is and get them to understand what the value is. So I do think that the more mid-level engineer or less experienced engineer criticism is valid, but I don't think that there's no way to solve that. There's absolutely a way to solve that, and it's just what's your setup like, and there'll be a way to solve it, I'm sure. Like, I don't think it's an unsolvable problem which should block you from using ShapeUp.
Definitely. And I mean, of course, I agree with you, because, as you know, I'm also quite passionate about ShapeUp. But in a way, if you force somebody more senior like yourself into a getting spoon-fed tickets situation, you are capping the upside in a big way. Whereas if you allow people like yourself to contribute, push back, and shape the thing that gets made, and then maybe have to grow other people into being confident to do the same. I mean, all you get is upside, right?
Exactly. And also, yeah, it goes back to that. What's the downside? It's like,
Yeah.
what's gonna happen? I think you can look at it as really black and white, and it's like it doesn't need to be like that.
For sure.
Like you've got a potential huge upside, and if you don't, you haven't got a massive downside. It's that it could be great. It could be like this. Even if it's down here, you've still made an improvement, and if it's the same as you were, then you've lost nothing in the first place. So like it's I think it's nice to have these conversations, but a lot of the time part of me is just like, just try it, see how it goes. Find out what works. There's people to guide you. It'll be okay.
It'll all be okay. I think those are, looking at the time, nice words to kind of wrap up on. I love that you're so passionate about this, and through your blog post you've mentioned people have reached out to you. If you continue to be available for that, what would be the best way for others, listeners potentially, to get in touch with you?
There's an email on my website, which is just chris@chrisboakes.com, which you can email me at, or I'm on LinkedIn, Chris Boakes, Twitter, cboakes. I've had a few people reach out to me, and I love talking about it. So likely the answer will be yes.
Cool. I'm going to put that in the show notes, and I'd love to check in, in a year or so to have the same conversation and see how you've rolled out ShapeUp further and iterated on your implementation.
Definitely. Thanks a lot for having me.
Cool. Thank you so much. This was really amazing. Loved it.
Cool. Cheers, David.
Cheers. There you have it. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Chris. I certainly did. If you like this show, please leave us a favorable review on your podcast platform of choice. And to find jobs at companies that work with ShapeUp, like Zoopla, remember to check out our job board at shapers.builders. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great day.